Good morning. Here we are once again in this place where we bring our fatigue, our bright ideas, our memories of vanished times and lost hopes, our uncertainty and our need for one another. And if that sounds trivial, you're mistaken, because there's nothing short of a miracle disguised as an ordinary Sunday morning. And for that reason, today, let's treat our time together as an opportunity, perhaps a unique opportunity, to find something in our hearts that we've been seeking, whether or not we know it. In honor of that, let's light our chalice to add that little bit of light to this place which has shone for 151 years. Right about now, all across the UK, all across Europe, I think, and America as well, people are reciting, they're praying a prayer which has been composed by the World Council of Churches. And I'm going to read it. And it's not always our practice just to take prayers that we hear read to us. But let's see if we can fold this one in here and find some way to mean this and to integrate it into our actions. It's a prayer for peace in Ukraine. God of all peoples and nations, who created all things alive and breathing, united and whole, show us the way of peace that is your overwhelming presence. We hold before you the peoples of Ukraine and Russia, every child and every adult. We long for the time when weapons of war are beaten into plowshares, when nations no longer lift up sword against nation. We cry out to you for peace. Protect those who only desire and deserve to live in security and safety. Comfort those who fear for their lives and the lives of their loved ones. Be with those who are bereaved. Change the hearts of those set on violence and aggression. And fill leaders with the wisdom that leads to peace. Kindle again in us a love of our neighbor and a passion for justice to prevail, and a renewed recognition that we all play a part in peace. Creator of all, hear our prayer and bring us peace. Make us whole. Amen. And with that, we've joined millions. Let's sing a song. Let's sing number 4 in the Purple Book. And what's the name of it? I can't remember. I love the way it's been put together by our colleague, Andrew Hill. All is abundant living. Oh, Lovely, interesting words in that hymn. All those things that are uncertain and may not quite be true. How interesting is that? I thought I might tell you a story this morning. All my adult life, I've been perplexed with the idea of exactly how much my participation matters in the grand scheme of things. So when you go to the recycling bin and you're a bit weary and the thing you have in your hand is plastic, yes, and you take 2 or 3 extra steps and put that in the plastic recycling where it belongs, I can tell that you've shared this experience. You're doing something for which there's no rewards, nobody pats you on the back. You have no idea even if you're helping at all. But there's something in it. There's some connection that's made there between your private action and the actions that need to be made on a global scale, that it's very important to keep that channel open. The minute you say, it does not matter, that's when things begin to fail. So once upon a time, a very popular, beloved king had been in exile from his country for many years. And things had changed and peace had come, and it was announced that the king was going to return. So there's great excitement, and the Grand Vizier and all of the staff planned a huge party for the king. And everybody in the kingdom was invited. The thing is that the treasury had been so depleted during the long years of war that they didn't have a lot of stock. So they asked everyone, please, to contribute their bit to help make the party good for the king when he came back. And so they asked everyone to bring 1 bottle of their own homemade wine, because in those days, everybody was a farmer and everybody had vines and they had wine at home. Well, let's pick somebody. What would his name be? Give me a name, come on. Albert had a farm just like everybody else. And he said, oh boy, this is going to be a great party. He said, but you know, actually, I'm running a bit low on wine. It's been a hard year for the vines. I think I'll go along and I think I'll put water in the wine bottle. No one will notice. It's all going into a huge vat. And so he did. And the king arrived with great fanfare. And he sat at the high table, and the whole kingdom was thronged around watching, and a toast was made to the king. And of course, the king would drink first. So it was taken from the vat, put into the king's golden goblet. He said, I thank you, my people, took a sip, and then spat it out. Because it wasn't just Albert who thought that it wouldn't make any difference. And they had learned the ancient miracle of turning wine into water. Would you sing us a song? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
I come to this garden alone, while the dew is still on them roses, and the world mine ear the ancient one discloses, and he walks with me, he talks with me, he tells me how I am his own, and the joys we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. He speaks, and the birds hush their tune. So sweet is the voice he is giving. That melody he gives to me within my heart is ringing. He walks with me, talks with me, he tells me how I am his own, and the joys we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. I'd stay in that garden with him, though the night be softly falling, but he bids me go through the voice of woe. To me that voice is calling. He walks with me, he talks with me, he tells me how I am his own, and the joys we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known.
That's a good old hymn that we used to sing in my Sunday school back in Christian, the American South. It was great. I love it. Okay, let's pull ourselves down together now and center down a bit, because we are here where we're meant to be. The clock only confirms this true appointment with ourselves. This time, this place, these people. So let us just sense the rightness of that truth and feel the welcome of this familiar moment, as new as the beautiful blooms on our altar, as old as the earth beneath our feet. Let us settle into the embrace of this meditation without fear or reluctance, for this is our moment. And around us are the signs of the passing of our time, like those fallen cherry blossoms that line the streets now. The spent days of our lives lie visible. Yet we may feel that none were lost and none were wasted, that all was necessary to bring us here to this moment. And in this moment, we may feel the welcoming arms of that moment that never ends, that now that can be found in a fraction of time too brief to be measured, and yet a full measure of eternity. And in this moment, we may find that for which we've searched without knowing and without ceasing. In this moment, the reality that hides in the folds of our ignorance may reveal itself and make of this journey an arrival home. For it is here, in this moment, which we make holy through the good silence, that we may find ourselves at last. Now let the silence leave the realm of mere sound and nestle comfortably in our hearts as we resume our chosen journeys through this world with all its demands of living and growing. May that still small voice, not quite heard, whisper to us in all our ways, in all our days. Bright sustainer of the traveler, one God of peace and comfort, and equally of task and turmoil, stay by us. So be it. Inshallah. Shalom. Amen. I knew Christine was coming. So we're going to sing hymn number 133 in the Green Book. How can I keep from singing? You know, for years now, I've thought that a verse in that hymn was a bit inappropriate, like the thing about tyrants trembling, sick with fear, and hear their death knell ringing, and we're all cheering about that. I really feel a little bit different about that at the moment. I have to confess that sometimes you want your tyrants to tremble, sick with fear. I think that's a truism. All right, here's a quiz for you. I hope you're prepared for this. What's this?
What's the Bible, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's in the Bible.
No? 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 Don't you, any of you know the name of this book?
Well, it's not the Quran, is it?
It's called the Holy Bible, and you won't find it anywhere else by the name the Bible. It's always called the Holy Bible, yes. And it's only taken me a few years to realize that that's true, though I studied the thing for 2 years, inside and out. It's the Holy Bible. It's a holy book. It's a holy book, more or less, from the tradition that we all come from. But there are many holy books, as you know. I've probably told you this before, but one of the things in my kitchen that I love, and I always chuckle whenever I'm in there trying to make a sandwich, I've got a fridge magnet of Jesus, and he's that Aryan Jesus, you know, with the auburn locks and the blue eyes, you know, and the perfectly clear white skin. And it says, Jesus is coming soon. Look busy. Yeah. Well, that's sort of the central statement of Christianity as it was taught to me in my youth. It talks about an appointment we've all already got somewhere with our Maker, in which we will be called to account for our lives. You know that thing? Jesus is coming soon. We have to look forward to the day of judgment. And some versions of this, like one form of Islam, actually have got this celestial courtroom. Yes, it's true, with God or Allah as the judge and Muhammad sitting on his right hand, and Jesus is there also, and they're all separating the sheep from the goats. The idea is that a devout soul will spend a good portion of his or her life preparing some sort of defense for that moment. I mean, that's what you're doing. Your behavior in this life, good, bad, or indifferent, determines your future after they have disconnected all the tubes from you in the hospital. Some people have always believed that preparing their defense is the only reason to go to church anyway, possibly a majority. That the obsequious flattery employed in traditional prayers earn them brownie points with God somehow. Like God likes a bit of flattery and all that. Not all. It would be wrong of me to imply that that's all Christians in all churches, but that is a very strong theme. There have always been people who felt the need to get close to God, and the church seemed like the nearest red telephone box. The fact that Unitarian congregations tend to be smaller than other denominations, have you noticed that? I certainly have. It's because we don't hand out free passes to everlasting life. And that reduces our target market considerably, down to those who simply want encouragement and companionship on their way to that big mystery. It's a different, whole kind of cat. The directions that we receive are not how-to guides at all, but subtle intuitions that can appear when minds and hearts get themselves open. Not holy writ, but beautiful clues available everywhere, like Easter eggs in an Easter egg hunt, if we tune ourselves to look for them. Well, my biggest bugbear of all in the whole business of traditional Christianity, mainstream churches, is that thing about holy books and the people who rely on them. That's why I once led a course here in this room called Irreverent Bible Studies, and that's why I'm sure that somebody could do a pretty good job of irreverent Quran studies. That is, if they weren't afraid of a fatwa. I take the view that spiritual geniuses like Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha come along every now and then. They're referred to in Hinduism as avatars, a word which has been really abused now to mean blue people on other planets in films and little sort of chess tokens that you have on your computer sites. But when these people turn up, or when they, as they say, manifest, the world gets a kind of spiritual boost. Things happen differently. New insights, new ways of living. People feel renewed or transformed, and their zeal to preserve that feeling, which must be wonderful, makes them write down their take on it. And that's when holy books appear. That's when religions get formed, with mullahs and ayatollahs and bishops and popes, and the clear truth embodied by those very prophets gets strangled in its cradle and lost in detail. There's no evidence to suggest that Jesus ever intended to found a church, for example. In the four Gospels, the three synoptic Gospels especially, there's only one reference to that. That's in Matthew. Matthew was a very sort of establishmentarian Jew who wanted to make things work out according to Jewish law. So he had Jesus ordaining Peter as the head of a church. Apart from that, there's absolutely no indication anywhere that he intended for there to be a church. Paul, who was the ultimate born-again believer, was the big church planter of the time. And the letters he wrote to converts after the death of Jesus are the very first lines in our own inherited holy book. They're the earliest writings in the Holy Bible. Well, most Muslims believe that the Quran is the literal, unvarnished word of Allah, basically dictated to Muhammad, who was illiterate. To decry this book or to refute what it says can literally bring about your death, as we know. Salman Rushdie found out. Some years ago, I had a good friend, a Muslim. He was a Shia Muslim from Iran. And after a long time of knowing each other, he gave me a gift. He gave me a Quran. And I was very grateful, and thank you. And I put it on my shelf. Had a lot of books, so it was flat. And then in time, other books came in, mystery books and whatever it was, and they wound up on top of the Quran. So one night he came over for dinner, and he looked at the shelf and he said, "You can't put other books on top of the Quran. Oh, you must remove them straight away." And I realized, yes, we were talking about a holy object, that it wasn't the words contained within the book, it was the object itself. And once I rashly, in a small group, when I was at Kensington, and this is going back many years now, I put a Holy Bible, on the floor And people were looking at it rather nervously. And at a certain point, I put my foot on top of it. All right, Stephen, now you gasped. I look out there and I saw you going, because there remains this idea that there's something about it, this object, which is holy and special. Now, of course, I wouldn't do something like that because I honor that feeling. But surely it cannot be that something that was written in a language that didn't exist in the 6th century when Muhammad was there, which has been printed in China, sent overseas for weeks on a South Korean vessel, passed through layers and layers of booksellers in this country, and winds up costing $9.95 somewhere in a bookshop. Surely that cannot be a holy object the same way. Well, the problem with all of that is that those words in that book were written by people. They were at least put down by people. We can all agree on that. And like all writing, they reflect the particular references and biases of the author and his or her environment. To make the words themselves infallible, or even worse, the very object, a holy object, is to make men, and yeah, they were always men back then, I confess. It makes the men infallible as well. How likely is that? And there's another problem. Times change. Meher Baba explained it this way. A doctor comes to visit a patient in the morning who's ill and prescribes fruit juice. He comes back at noon and prescribes a bowl of warm milk. He comes back in the evening and prescribes weak tea. It's the same patient, the same illness, but it's different times. At different times, the message has to change. At different times, the spiritual needs of people have changed. We don't know why Paul said for women to hide their hair in church. But outside of a few Pentecostal and heavily Catholic churches, you don't see a lot of hats in church these days. The wearing of the hijab, well, that's basically illegal in France now. And it has a lot more to do with semi-nomadic tribes back in Muhammad's time than anything that appears in the Quran. There's this story, maybe you've heard it, about a guru who taught his disciples to meditate in a quiet temple. Absolute silence. The only problem was there was this annoying cat who used to come in and interrupt the meditation. So the guru said, well, tie the cat to that table leg so he can't go around and bother people. And so they did. They tied the cat around the neck and tied him to a table leg. Years later, they couldn't have a meditation without having a cat, which they then tied to a table leg. And then after that passed, they made little statuettes of a cat with a rope around his neck, and you couldn't meditate unless you had that. Religious rituals, you could say, are little statues of cats with string around their necks. And as for holy books, who wouldn't want a chapter and verse? Come on, let's be realistic about it. Who wouldn't want a handbook that, if you had it, gave you all the answers? All you had to do was follow the instructions. You'd wind up going to heaven. You'd be happy. Everything would be perfect, wouldn't it? Well, that's what a lot of people think the Holy Bible is and the Quran is. Lowell, I don't know if you remember this, but a few years ago we had a stall down here during the Pride Parade. We had a stall there and we had some Unitarian information out. And some guy came up to us, some really well-dressed young man, clearly a businessy type guy. You remember that guy? great. He came over and he saw a couple of vulnerable old Unitarians and thought, I'm going to get these guys. So he came at us full bore with Christianity with a Bible clutched in his hand. Oh my God, he said, you know, as we threaded our way in this argument through this labyrinth of church language, one thing became clear. For evidence, every time he made a point, it came back to the book in his hand. And we said, well, you can't do that. It's circular logic. You can't start there and end there. You can't make your point that way. And he looked at me, I'll swear I'll never forget this. He said, the fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. I said, not me, cousin. I didn't say that, you know. But he meant that we couldn't be a church. We couldn't teach. We had no power to preach. We had no ability to reach people because we were not connected to this holy book in that same way. Well, I put it to you, you're good, loyal Unitarians, could he be right? Could he be right? Could he have some magic rule book that we don't have? Would you want one? No, you wouldn't, Freddie. You wouldn't want one. And why? They won't hear you out there in Cyberland, so I'll repeat. It's better to find out on your own, and absolutely 100% right. Some of us might be overjoyed. Yay, no more worries. The shining path of certainty is right there before us. It's so comfortable compared to what we're going through. Honestly, it is. All we have to do is consult that book, follow those instructions, and voila, start getting measured for our wings. But I believe that joy would fade pretty fast because along with our intuition, that there is something spiritual to long for. There's also an intuition that says something like this: why should it all be easy? Isn't it possible that the point of all this living is about finding the truth among the scattered clues that we know as our lives? If you're going to create a universe, why would you post a blueprint of how it worked at the beginning? What would be the point of that? It reminds me of that adolescent remark often aimed at God, the God who permits cruelty and pain. If that's the kind of God he is, I don't want to know him. Turn that just a bit and you can say, if God can be found in a handbook, I don't want to know him. Because we're all stumbling toward truth in our own ways. If there's a God, then that's the way he made us. And if there's a God, he knows what he's doing. From the earliest roots of Unitarianism, we would have lived with this truth. No one is lost. No one gets left behind. So let's go on stumbling along together. What do you say? I say amen. Yesterday we had a memorial service for John Krask, very well attended, and we had some lovely food provided by David and Mary and the family, and we still got some. So stick around after church and munch on some sandwiches and drink some of Lowell's superb coffee. and there was even some wine yesterday, wasn't there? Going back to our original custom, we were the church served wine before. I think we ought to get back to that as soon as we can. Yes, I see some nods. Is there anything I should be mentioning? We need anything about the newsletter? You need contributions, Jim? He needs contributions. We will give free passes to heaven to anyone who writes a contribution. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. The weather's getting better, so let's all get better with it. Why don't we sing one of our favorites, number 44? Give thanks for life. Let us not forget that the little hexagonal wooden box will be sitting on the table. So any contributions we can make to keep this whole place going are welcome. Now, whether we've been comforted or troubled, shaken or stirred, made lost or felt found, let's turn from this hour with minds more open now, with hearts more tender and hands more willing. Let us go out into a world transformed by our seeing and made more just and decent by our deeds, however small that contribution. And for this, let us look after one another, help one another, support one another until we meet again. Amen.